financial planning and literacy, certainly a line by line approach, and something that takes years and decades to develop, really grows over time. So although that might feel overwhelming to go through all of those at one time, starting somewhere is the most important thing. Some kind of a plan, and the plan's probably going to shift over time. I think everybody's plan shifts over time, especially as they learn more avenues for financial investment, especially as they acquire more wealth. And so, if that seemed overwhelming to you, it's not too late. You can start somewhere, but there are so many places that you can go, and so many places to go to further that financial growth.
Welcome, millionaires and future millionaires. You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, a show where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their portfolio allocation. Now to your host, Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 391.
This is the podcast where we dive into the real-world, unscripted net worths and asset allocations of everyday millionaires and not-so-everyday millionaires. And this week, as we brought in the new year, we will kick off 2025 with a 2024 MU recap. Jace, let's talk some nerdy personal finance facts and figures about our 2024 guests.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody. 2024 was a phenomenal year for the podcast. In fact, we had our highest total net worth of $862 million, 862.2 collectively, and which brings the average to about 16.26. Now, there's a couple of outliers. We had some, over 300, a couple hundred plus. So if you take those out, you take the outliers out, we kind of ended the year with an average of 5.25 million, which is the highest ever that we've had in the history of the podcast, and has started moving the overall average up pretty significantly. So now, we used to kind of stay around 3.3 to 3.4 to 3.5, and now we're up into that high 3.7, 3.8 range collectively in the history of the podcast. Now, that is pulling out the outliers and everything else, those that typically have gone, above 100 million and even above 50 million. So pretty exciting for the podcast. I think, see, maybe one of these years we'll hit the $1 billion threshold, and in 1 year collectively interview millionaires worth over $1 billion, or maybe we'll have a billionaire on the podcast soon. We'll see about that. And yeah, if you break it down into kind of the 5 tiers, so to speak. So those that are under 5, between 5 and 10, those between 10 and 25, those between 25 and 100, and then over 100, which, you could debate on where we should kind of put the tiers, but that kind of creates a little bit of a bell curve, if you will, in some respects. We had 71% of our millionaires were under 5 million. 21% were between 5 and 10 million. 19%, which was one of the highest ever, were between 10 and 25. And then 6% respectively were between 25 and 100. And then another 6% of millionaires on the show were over 100. So kind of pretty diverse still, and still in line with, for the most part, where we have landed. Occupations are all over the board. I mean, this year was definitely one to remember. Going back into kind of the database of podcast episodes, episode 378 stood out as Dan had a net worth of 37 million. All 10 of his siblings became millionaires. His dad, their dad of the 10 kids, never made over minimum wage. Pretty remarkable. In 375, which was a few episodes prior to that, we had Noah, good buddy. He's fired from Facebook back in the day. Could have been worth probably as much as he is worth now, but through Facebook, and instead had to build up his own company and some other stuff. He's just shy of 200 million. And his story is very well published all over the place. So it's pretty cool and pretty neat that he came on the show and shared some of that and got a little bit more in the details than he has anywhere else. Brian Presson, good friend of the show. Money Guys, if you know his show, the Money Guy podcast, he's hit his 10 million now. So yeah, he I think he shared on his original episode with us several years ago that he had a big goal to get to 100,000 by the time that he was, or make $100,000 a year by the time he was 30. And I think he said he was a year or two past that or close to it. And then he wanted to have $1 million net worth at 40. And same thing, kind of was right there, but just barely past it. And then, be at 10 million by the time he was 50, and he surpassed that by a long shot. So kind of nice that he shared that with us. And, now we won't disclose his age, but apparently he's in his 50s and he's over 10 now. So, episode 344, we had Johnson, became a digital nomad, so to speak, quit his job, traveled the world, got to 1.2 million in net worth and decided, you know what, that's enough. I don't need another million. And, so he kind of shared his lifestyle that he's pursuing and pursued, leaving the kind of corporate world, which we're seeing more and more, especially those in kind of their younger age group. If they've made some substantial wealth, maybe got burned out or just wanted to shift priorities, we've seen some of that take place more and more. Episode number 340. That was Brian, who started late by a lot of measurements. I mean, he didn't really get going until he was 40, which we do get a lot of people writing in like, what if I'm, at this age, whatever it might be, 40s, 30s, 50s, can I still do it? Can I still catch up? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we've seen that. Brian on episode 340 is another example of that. And we start off the year with Rain, episode 337, house hacked all the way to a $2.1 million net worth, most of it through real estate. So some great highlights, several other amazing episodes. The show continues to grow, several million downloads per year. And appreciate all the listeners that keep tuning in and keep sharing the podcast. That's what continues to help us find those new millionaire interviewees. Like I've said many times before, this is all volunteer. So, we rely on those that are willing to share their stories and kind of divulge, a certain level of information. And, we appreciate those that have done it so far. And we're getting close to 400. So pretty exciting.
As you were sharing some of those facts and figures, I had a couple questions come up and just some thoughts. I do think our average might actually be a little bit higher than that number, because of the anonymity, we do give our guests the option just to state they're over 1 or over 5 or over 10. And I mean, they could say 1 and it's 15, or they could say over 10 and it's 25, but the crux of the show is at least being a millionaire and sharing your asset allocation from there. So anyway, just thought could be potentially higher than even that number. Question though, our average net worth has grown this last year to upwards of 5 million on our guests that were interviewed, if we take out those outliers. Do you think that there are more millionaires now, or that the average net worth of individuals overall has grown versus when we started the show? Or do you think that we just have more people with higher net worths coming on?
Inflation. That's my answer.
I thought that might be your answer, but I thought maybe it was something cooler.
No, I think that part of it is inflation. I mean, we've seen some substantial bull markets, and even though when we had a little bit of some bear slippage or some interest rate adjustments, for the most part, people, especially with real estate, it's hard to market, your real estate every month, for example. You really may not know what it's truly valued at until you go to sell it. If it's commercial real estate, sometimes you can back in pretty well if you know your NOI, or you know what your rents are going to be, you know where interest rates land. But for residential real estate, for even other things, like, at the end of the day, it's only worth what somebody else is willing to pay for it, and in a lot of cases, what a bank may underwrite it. And the same thing goes for business and really any asset that's illiquid. And so, I think maybe some of those real estate values have come down and people maybe not have adjusted them yet, or didn't know to adjust them, or where it should land. Same thing with business. But overall, I mean, we've seen inflation, skyrocket for the most part in the last little bit here comparatively. When we started the show several years ago, uh, we hadn't seen inflationary periods, in several decades like we have now. And so I think the average uptick, some of that's due to inflation. Obviously, the market has been on a substantial bull run for really the greater part of the last couple decades, or almost a couple decades, I should say. I mean, really since '08, '09, the markets, performed substantially well compared to a lot of other periods of time. Now we've seen some little hiccups with COVID and a few other things, but nothing to the likes of what we've seen, in prior economic cycles. So I think that's a big reason for it. But at the same time, yeah, there's more millionaires than there were previously. And, I get asked the question when I go on some other podcasts sometimes as a guest, is $1 million still $1 million? And absolutely, the answer is yes, because it still is a nice benchmark. But there's no secret that the purchasing power of $1 million today is not what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, et cetera. And so getting to that point and getting to that mark, I think is still a big thing and a big win. But, can we compare it to, say, the number of millionaires that existed 30 years ago? No, it's just not. You're not comparing apples to apples with the amount of inflation that we've experienced, during that time period. I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to tell me, like, some of the people that he, worked with when I was around was like, oh, they tell me they're going to retire if the market, if the Dow hits 10,000. And here we are, like, it's hovering around 42, 43, 44,000 as of late. It's 4x what it was back then. Those people still aren't retired that, my dad's talked about at that point. Maybe so a couple of them have been, but for the most part, that just hasn't come to fruition, as inflation has eaten up some of the purchasing power of the dollar. And, it's just reality that we live in. And, in the last couple of years, we've seen a massive surge of crypto, which has been brought up on the show. It's not been a substantial piece of very many people's portfolios, but I think we are going to start seeing more and more of that. I know that for me, for example, I've continued to lean in a little bit more to crypto than I have in the past, partly because I like the technology, and this is by no means an endorsement or anything, but I think that there's some interesting things that could be done. Obviously, we have an incoming administration that seems to have support behind it. And, as we've moved off the gold standard, years ago, there's a lot of question marks around what's the value of what is the real value of our currency, and what is, that going to look like in the future, and will we be able to exchange goods and services the way we have forever? And as things shifted, I mean, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, like, cash was pretty predominant still. And, even in our US government, you go to a national park before COVID, and it was like you had to pay cash. And in some cases, that's just a thing of the past. COVID helped change some of that, but then also the adoption of plastic and, the usage of it. You go to a lot of other countries, they're still probably behind in regards to, the adoption of electronic funds and whatnot. They're still using cash a lot. I mean, I lived in East Europe when I served my church mission, and we used cash pretty much every day, everywhere. And cards were kind of starting to become a thing, but not very common, so to speak. It was probably 80% cash for the most part on the day to day. Go buy groceries, go down to the local, whatever. Even paying rent, paid rent in cash a lot, which was crazy. But, your bills that you paid, your water bill, like, you just go down and that's been several years now, but it's slow to adopt. Now, crypto provides an opportunity sometimes for some of these countries, and you're starting to see some of these third world countries want to adopt this and almost just bypass, the plastic in a way. So we'll have to see what that does from an investment standpoint. But I do think that we will start to see more of that amongst our millionaires, especially the younger ones that, have been around crypto or been exposed to it earlier. Maybe not so much with portfolios that are seasoned, so to speak. Somebody like my dad's age, for example, is baby boomer. I don't see my dad being like, yeah, let me get some crypto right now when I'm about to retire. But some others in, younger generation with a longer time horizon may do so.
Interesting thoughts on purchasing power, the value of $1 million, and what might be on the horizon with crypto. What other key lessons do you think we learned from our millionaires in 2024?
Yeah, this is the most common question that we get asked, written in or, published on ratings or wherever. I mean, everybody wants to know, what are you learning? What's shocking? Like, what can I do? How can I get an edge? And I think, and I share variations of this answer, but it comes back to there's a lot of ways to do it, which has been probably one of the most surprising things overall since we started the show, basically 8 years ago. What I thought was, a very directional path for most people to get there. My eyes have been open to the hundreds of different paths that can be taken. There's not just one way to do it. It's not, the media sometimes likes to make it out to be that, you've got to start this business in tech and this tech company's got to go public and that's the way to do it. Uh, the reality is it can be done in every profession. And I think in nearly every profession, there's going to be high earners. And at the end of the day, like the delta between what you earn and what you spend is really what matters, and where that goes, whether it goes in investments, whether it goes into growing a business, whether that goes into buying more assets such as real estate or, crypto or whatever it might be that has a potential to grow. That's the biggest thing that matters. Whatever that number is, whatever you can continue to put away. And obviously the earlier you do it, the more opportunity you have for compounded interest. But like I said earlier, I mean, there's no age where you're done. I mean, you still have opportunity. For the most part, I think we've seen a lot of our millionaires going to go from zero or even negative 200, 300. We had a few this last year that I think started out in the hole at 300 plus. And, they got there in 10 years. Right. And sometimes the level of the income and the size of that shovel helps. And so, if you're going into medical school, for example, or some level of professional, advanced degree, and you take on a bunch of debt, but then you come out and you have a large shovel to get out of that debt hole, but then also put money away for investments. Some people may say, well, getting there in a decade's not that big of a deal, or, that's pretty easy. But I think a lot of people have been able to do that in a decade, and there's been some people that take longer. And obviously that size of the shovel and the delta between what you earn and what you spend, is going to kind of dictate how fast you get there. Obviously the market and whatever you invest in has some relevance as well. But, at the end of the day, like that delta seems to be what matters the most, especially in the first few years. They always say the first hundred's the hardest, the millions the next hardest, and sure enough, like we've seen that turn into a hockey stick for a lot of our millionaires. And I think it's starting even to take effect a little bit with the number of guests that we're seeing on the show move into that 5+ mark and that 10+ mark, and even those that have been traditionally in a W-2 job that may not have made substantial 6 figures or 7-figure incomes. They've just had the time because of that delta they put away starting 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now they're in their 50s and 60s, kind of reaping that benefits, where their portfolio might grow at, mid 6 figures per year at this point, or maybe even approaching 7 figures in growth, just based on an average return that the market's giving you back, whether it's real estate or securities.
So compound interest always on your side, but it's never too late to start, but you have to start. I think that's probably the number one thing that we hear from our millionaires is, what's the first, what piece of advice would you give someone just starting out? And I think more often than not, the advice is just start, start somewhere. So at this point, Jace, you have interviewed personally almost 400 millionaires. What shifts, if any, have you seen as of late in asset allocation, and how that has played a role in maybe expediting the process and becoming a millionaire, or just moving the needle on that net worth, whether you're less than $1 million or maybe you have 5 million at this point? What shifts are you seeing?
It's a good question, and I feel like for a while there we were seeing a lot of asset class jumping, so to speak, where people would start one way. Let's just say, started working in post 2009 world. They put money in the market, and then pretty quickly they were like, "Oh, I'm going to go jump into real estate, or I'm going to jump into entrepreneurship, or whatever it might be." And there still is a divide. I mean, you look at the data in our podcast, and we've got a lot that are real estate only. We've got a lot that are market only. We've got a lot that kind of have a combination there of those two, and then kind of the smallest is that business category or entrepreneurial category, which is reflective of kind of what our economy is. I mean, there's a lot of people that work in a W-2 type format, and then peel some of that off and put it in the market, invest it. There's a lot that peel some of that off and invest in real estate. And then there's, a smaller portion that either do that or own a business and work in a business or as a sole proprietor, is just a smaller number in general. But I think that number is growing overall. We are seeing an uptick of those that provide supplemental income, whether it's driving for Uber on the nights and the weekends, or, doing things in a freelance manner with skills that they already have. The internet, the democratization of technology in general, I think has allowed for, particularly, the last 5 to 10 years, for these things to really skyrocket and take off. And we are seeing more and more of that happen. Now, I wouldn't say that we see a lot that, make that jump where they might leave a job. It might just be more supplemental income, or, things that they're working towards in a goal that, for a lot of people may not have ever been an option, working without kind of the internet and the speed of the internet that we have today. In terms of actual investments, it stayed pretty steady between how many people continue to invest in real estate and people that continue to invest in the market. Now, I will be curious to see over the next few years, as we bring on, new interviewees, what shift might have happened, given that real estate prices and interest rates for the greater part of the last, couple years now have really made it hard to pencil buying and entering the market. For the longest time, on the kind of the bull trajectory we were on post 08, 09, almost everything was penciling every year for a lot of people to continue to invest in. But that all came to a halt in a lot of respects with the interest rate environment. And so I think we'll start to see fewer that have, moved into real estate compared to where they did previously, or maybe even business, because, business has gotten expensive to buy. Interest rates are still not as favorable in that environment. And so maybe it scared people away. But yeah, time will tell.
Other valuable takeaways from 2024 you think that we should make note of?
Yeah. So before we dive into all the other nitty gritty that people always want to know on this episode, and I feel like I get these throughout the year, but we save it kind of for this one episode, because at the end of the day, like, the show's about our guests, it's not about us and whatever. But I get it. We got a lot of data. We do have a book coming soon. We'll have more on that coming, but we're getting through final publishing right now, so it'll be it's been a long project, but it's interesting, and I'm excited to share it with everybody. But one of the things that we get asked a lot in general too is just, can you pinpoint a habit? Can you pinpoint a book? Can you pinpoint, these things that give the edge, as I kind of spoke to earlier? And I started to make a list of all the things that, like, oh, this comes to mind, and this comes to mind, and this comes to mind. And I'm just going to kind of read through a bunch real quick, and just kind of some high level bullet point things that I spoke a little bit earlier, just about the delta and being able to peel off money, but there also is a piece of what do you do with that money, right? And so, we look at things in various data points from our guests and people that we've talked to, and you can fit based on where people's income comes from and into kind of a handful of categories or whatever. But what happens after that? No matter where your income level is, like, what are people doing that are millionaires? To focus, to set goals, to achieve, to get to the next level or whatever. And so the things that I'll run through here real quick is, at the end of the day, they have a plan, and it's not something that people just wake up and are like, okay, 6 years later, here we are, and it happened. They just don't. I mean, they have a plan. What's the income coming in, and what are you going to do with it? If you expect to make $55,000 this year, how much of that 55 are you going to set away in, whether it's retirement or some sort of investment vehicle for the future? How much are you going to spend? What are you going to do with it? They have a plan. I mean, they just don't wake up and things happen. Taxes. How do you evaluate your tax situation? Do you have to pay some estimated because you own a business or have real estate, or maybe you don't, and there's going to be losses that come through? Do you need to make any adjustments to a W-4 if you're working a W-2 job? Did you have a kid this year? Did you get a big refund last year due to whatever your tax situation was that needs to be adjusted? The IRS borrowed money from you, penalty and interest free. You don't want that, right? So those are the things that, this time of year, especially that they're thinking of. Health insurance changes. You got open enrollment. Most people do it this time of year. You make any changes to that? Your deductibles need to adjust. Are you planning to have a baby? Are you done having babies? Did you never have babies and didn't have to worry about that? Do you have health conditions where your deductible you want your deductible to be lower or higher for whatever reason, depending on what your premium may look like? Health insurance is a big conversation. Costs continue to rise at a high rate. And so how do you assess what you need for your family, as it relates to your healthcare and your pharmaceuticals and all the different little things that go into that? And you need to make adjustments for that related to your financial situation so that, you can shift risk around or whatever it may be.
Listen up, millionaires and soon to be millionaires. Do you ever buy anything online? I know I do. In fact, some of my favorite places to purchase are online. Do you know some of those favorite places that you buy from? There's some amazing websites out there, and many of them are powered by Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real life store stage and all the way in between to we just hit $1 million order stage. Yep, Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're selling shipping supplies or promoting productivity programs, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their personal in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading e-commerce platforms. And sell more with less effort, thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star. What I love about Shopify is no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control of your business to the next level. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/unveiled, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/unveiled now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/unveiled. And thanks again to Shopify for supporting today's episode.
Risk assessment is a huge thing. How much insurance to carry? Do you have an umbrella policy or all your auto policies, your house policy? I mean, just line by line, all the different things that you can do to shift risk or not. Maybe you're like, hey, I'm the point where in these ones, I'm going to self-insure, or, hey, maybe my deductibles should rise up because I'm a little bit more comfortable than I was previously when I started this journey, or whatever it might be. Take a look at those things. A lot of people don't touch them, and they may be paying, additional premium they don't need to. Or do you even go shop it around and look at rates? It's a competitive industry, and a lot of people feel like it's a grind to do so they don't even shop it. And, they leave money on the table. Essentially, they give to the profit of these insurance companies. So those things people are, a lot of our millionaires talk about and speak to. If you're going to invest in the market in a tax advantage account, are you doing a Roth? You're doing a traditional? You're going to do a backdoor Roth because of your income. Did you actually invest that money that you put into those vehicles? A lot of people, believe it or not, will put money into these vehicles and actually not take the next step and buy investments. Believe it or not, I did this one time and I didn't catch it for 2 or 3 months. And I started kind of researching it, talking to some people, and almost everybody that I knew that I have some of these conversations with, oh man, I did that one time too. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 2 years later, in one case, a guy told me. So, make sure that everything you think you're doing, you're actually doing it, and double checking. Are you changing your passwords? We've got a massive amount of hackers in this world that, would love to get their hands and their mitts on everything that you make and earn. So are you changing your passwords frequently enough that, you have two-factor authentication? I mean, a lot of the financial companies make you have that now, but getting through some of these habits and things to, assess and make sure that you're protected. Do you have any portfolio changes? Is life event adjusted some things in your life that, lead to, hey, I need to probably adjust my portfolio, or I don't want to be 100% equities anymore because I'm approaching, I want to go more, conservative route. I've made it, or vice versa. Hey, maybe I was too conservative and I don't need to be anymore, or whatever it might be. Looking at those portfolio changes that may need to happen. If you got kids, you planning to pay for their college or help them out in any way? Are you using an ESA? Can you use an ESA? Your income level, what does that look like? Or do you go through a 529 route? A lot of changes happen with 529s this last year. So, they're more attractive to a lot of people. And, but then again, maybe you're one of those that thinks your kids won't go to college, or you don't want to plan for that, but how do you plan, or do you plan at all? And, what kind of investments are those invested in? Are all of your beneficiaries up to date? We had 2 more kids this year, twins. And so, I had to go through that exercise myself, and I had to kind of pick my favorite child. Oh, well, I'm just kidding. Not my favorite child, but we had to go through that exercise. If you own real estate or plan to buy real estate, or you set up to do so, do you need to educate yourself better on it? All the things that go in risk in owning real estate. Are you prepared for all those things? From an emergency standpoint, do you have the cash reserves? Do you need to change anything related to that portfolio that you may have? Same thing goes with business, and there's a slew of things, as it relates to owning businesses and whatnot. Is your will up to date? Most people don't even have one, but something that a lot of our millionaires we talk about. I'm surprised at how few go through this exercise, honestly, that are millionaires. But something this time of year, great time to do it. Do you have a trust? Do you need a trust? What kind of trust? A lot of different things to kind of consider. Do you have an estate plan? Do you need to have an estate plan at your level? Does that make sense to start thinking through that and start planning it? A ton of things that we see with our millionaires, various stages, and some of them, and I'll tell you this, up front, that of all those things that I kind of just went through and listed, a lot of millionaires forget 1 or 2 or 3, or don't plan around those until later stages, or maybe they don't do it perfectly, but it's on their mind, and they're working towards executing it. Sometimes it's not as quickly as maybe they want, but the ones that I think are, at a necessary level, that a lot of these conversations have to take place and decisions have to get made. You start thinking through, like, hey, do I have the right CPA for where I'm at? Do I have the right insurance agent, attorney, all these different professionals that I may or may not need? Am I in a good spot with all of them? Do I have a financial advisor? Do I want one? Do I not? All the things to consider, as it relates to the financial plan in your well-being. Did you go have your annual physical at the doctor? A lot of people don't even do that unless if they feel like they're healthy, they don't even address it. And, they don't get labs done or these kinds of things. So a lot of things to think through. At the end of the day, I think our millionaires, like I said, go through a majority of this list, and we have a lot of these conversations on the podcast, about them.
financial planning and literacy, certainly a line by line approach, and something that takes years and decades to develop, really grows over time. So although that might feel overwhelming to go through all of those at one time, starting somewhere is the most important thing. Some kind of a plan, and the plan's probably going to shift over time. I think everybody's plan shifts over time, especially as they learn more avenues for financial investment, especially as they acquire more wealth. And so, if that seemed overwhelming to you, it's not too late. You can start somewhere, but there are so many places that you can go, and so many places to go to further that financial growth. You know, we always start off this podcast and say that it's unscripted, and it is. And so Jace is usually the one asking questions, but it's really fun to just hear him kind of take off with all the things that are in his mind. And I think one of his superpowers is just his ability to take this bird's eye view of so many moving pieces and really make it all come together. So thanks for sharing so many of your valuable insights.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we get asked a lot too is like, what are the main mistakes that people make that I can avoid? And I think that, as we learn, everybody makes mistakes, and even if you see a mistake from somebody else, you may learn from that one, but you may make another one. And so, as we've had millionaires come on this podcast, every single one of them has a mistake to story, one or two or three or many. And so when you do make mistakes, you're not alone. Everybody goes through it. And that's just part of learning. And I think it's what makes us better. I mean, at the end of the day, like we're a collection of our experiences, and some of those experiences sometimes are mistakes. And so, as we've had more and more guests on our show and, seen that level of wealth in some respects this last year go to an all-time high, with the amount of guests and the averages that we've had on the show. So have some of these mistakes that we've seen too. But I would say that, for the most part, these mistakes, don't cripple them. They overcome them, they figure it out, they navigate through it, and they're able to kind of, persevere to get through, and developing the mindset around that, sometimes can be challenging, but we've seen a lot of them. So if you're one of those, like, man, I've already made, a lot of mistakes, or I don't know if I can overcome these mistakes. I mean, the reality is you can. A lot of millionaires have, and I guarantee you go through all the episodes, there's somebody who's made a similar mistake, has been able to come out on the other side. But you got to, like Stacey said, you got to start somewhere.
Right. Well, if you hit on all of your highlights for 2024. So prior to recording this episode, we went back through and listened to our January 2024 episode. And surprisingly, our biggest surprise of 2023 is still our biggest surprise of 2024. And that is that we still have not had anybody on the show with $500,000 or more in their HSA account.
Yeah, I still don't know why I'm so shocked by this, but I continue to be, I guess, probably because I feel like that HSA that's been around, I mean, it's what, 20 years, I said last time, well, over 20 years now. And I just would have thought at some point that would continue to grow with these bull markets, that somebody out there, a few people would be, 500 plus. But we're still looking. I guarantee at some point we're going to get somebody that's there.
2025 is the year we're going to have someone with $500,000 in an HSA.
Maybe I need to go down to like 250. I don't know. In full disclosure, we get a lot of people that ask about kind of updating ours, which in some respects, like I said, the show's not about us, and we did go on, I think it was episode 161, and shared a little bit of our story, but I will share a couple of tidbits, and down the road, maybe we'll do a little bit more once it's kind of, it's got to be a few years, right? It's not interesting enough, doing an update. Maybe it is. I don't know. Not for me, but doing an update every year with things. Sometimes things change drastically, and sometimes they don't really. But I don't remember what my HSA. Well, I guess I can go back and look at it because I do track it. I'm not sure when we went on that episode, but basically, I've been a big advocate myself of the HSA just because I feel like the power that comes with being kind of the triple tax advantage, and then also just the rising healthcare costs in general. If you continue to save it and invest it, but this was the year that, or 2024, that I'll remember that we did eclipse six figures in the HSA. So I am proud to throw that out there and continue to grow that thing. Because we haven't utilized any. I've been saving my receipts, and I'm planning to save them for a while here and continue to grow that. Cause I do think, as healthcare costs increase, and that being one of the most important things that we have, I definitely would love to continue to have that little nest egg set aside, particularly specifically for healthcare. That said, I feel like there's got to be some. I mean, I'm young enough, but not putting into an HSA for, I think, probably not even, or just barely, maybe a little over a decade now. And there's got to be somebody who's 250 plus or 500 plus. We're going to find them. Somebody's going to come on the show. But that still is very surprising to me that we haven't had anybody yet. And just the usage of those accounts. I said this last year on this episode as we were listening to it. Stacey said, it's still surprising to me that that's not utilized more. I mean, I think maybe some people use it instead of investing it, but I'm surprised that it's not a, part of, I guess, our Millionaires investment program, so to speak, or portfolio or plan to grow that account and have that set aside. Maybe nobody fears healthcare as much as I do, or cost of healthcare. I don't know, but it has some great benefits, and I like the account, and it's definitely become a lot more accessible too. I mean, a lot of the big brokerage houses have all picked those accounts up and provide a lot of investment options compared to where they were when I feel like we started investing in our HSA. But anyway, and the other thing to note from that episode, I joked about the Tesla update. Listeners, still no Tesla, but it's all good. Maybe one day.
If you missed last year's episode, you don't need to go back and listen to it. But Jace set a certain net worth goal that he was going to buy a Tesla. And this was, I think we reached it years ago. And he still does not feel like he can afford a Tesla. So, or it hasn't been worth it to him. So we're still Tesla-less, and we are still transit full. We have the 12-passenger transit is going strong. And one day we'll have a cool sports car, and today is not that day.
That is correct. And the other thing that I will update, I still wholeheartedly subscribe to my three leg investment stool, and between business, real estate, and market tax advantaged accounts plus brokerages, kind of throw in that, and I've kind of combined with crypto in that bucket now too. So anything that is a little bit more liquid, so to speak, is part of that. And I'm still sticking to it, although business continues to kind of, depending on where things really are, who knows, but it's hard to know until you actually sell. But that piece continues to grow. But I still love those three personally, investments myself, or asset classes the most. So anyway, little tidbit on that for those that continue to ask, and down the road we'll probably do a little more elaborate episode once there's more interesting things to talk about as things grow or hit milestones or whatever.
As you talk about your personal investment strategy, any changes at last year's January 1 episode talked about your preference to keep your primary home less than 10% of net worth. Are your feelings still there?
Yeah, I mean, this dates back to an article really before I even started this podcast that I still reference frequently, and it had a breakdown. It's from the Wall Street Journal. I think it was back in 2014 or 16 or something, but it referenced, kind of the breakdown of asset classes amongst millionaires at various levels. And the general consensus between, those that were 1 and those that were over 20 was that, primary residence / personal real estate for primary use, whether that's, second home, third home, whatever it might be for some people that have substantial net worths, none of them had a breakout in those. I think it was 3 different kind of categories, like call it 1 plus, 5 plus, 20 plus, or whatever it was. They never had their personal residence more than 20% of their overall net worth. And in some cases, a lot of that, I think for 2 out of 3 were 10% or less. And so I've always kind of held that as, kind of steady in my head, is that's probably where that needs to stay. And partly because that's, that's an asset. Some people don't, may not include it in their net worth actually, but everybody's got to have a place to live. But that's just not something that pays you. And in fact, it's going to cost you money because you got to pay utilities, you got to pay property taxes, depending on where you live, and maybe even HOA fees. And so it becomes kind of a cost. And you don't want to get too out of balance with that. Now, you may at different parts of your life. I mean, I think there's parts when I first bought, the condo before we got married, like I was probably out of balance then. I don't know. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look, but there's probably times where you may be, especially when you're younger, but I've never wanted to get that too far out of balance. You don't want to buy too much home, be house poor type thing. Having said all that, I have very much shifted my mindset, particularly not necessarily last year, but over the last few years of, making a house a home and the investment that goes into that. I mean, being in the industry, I've seen that, most people, when they typically get, a bonus check or sell a company or, have saved for 5 years, 10 years, like there's 2 places basically most people will spend it in a substantial way. And it's either a new home upgrade, renovation or whatever. And then, which I kind of all bucket in one, or a new car or, upgraded car or whatever. And so I, for the most part, used to think, home's a home, whatever. Like, how important is it really to like continue to spend money on a home and upgrade and whatever. But as our family's grown, as you know, preferences have changed, as things change in life in general. I mean, average people move every like what 5, 6 years, 7 years now, and so we're kind of fitting into that category for the most part, where you kind of want to change and adjust, and maybe you need more space like we do for 5 kids, but also not only just spending money there, but making it enjoyable. I want to have a fun office. I spend more time in it. I want to have places where I can make good memories and have important lessons learned with my children, with my family. And that's definitely different than from a mindset standpoint than I had probably, even 5 years ago, where it was like, yeah, let's just have a place to live. Like, what does it really matter? Okay, it can be kind of nice, but like, I want to spend as, little money as possible on it, because that's just not what I really cared about at the time. And that's shifted with having kids and growing a family, and, also kind of coming back to like, what do I really want to spend my money on? And what am I really saving for? And what really matters in life?
I think that's a good segue into some of probably our final takeaways from our millionaires for this previous year, which is kind of that, I don't know what you might call it, that life equity. What things are millionaires beyond the dollars? What's really making our millionaires feel like they've made it and feel successful beyond the money. Once the money is at a point that they feel like at a comfortable spot, how do they know where to spend it, and where does it start to bring some joy in a different way?
Yeah, and we've been asking that question a lot more, and the general consensus is, travel. People pay for upgraded travel, whether it be, plane tickets, first class, even in some cases. We've heard quite a bit more than I would have probably ever thought. It's funny I bring this up though. I mean, just flying recently randomly ran into a friend on an airplane, and I don't know what his net worth is, but I know it's substantial. And, we were flying a discount airline. Shout out to Allegiant, who is amazing. And he's, rocking a very expensive 5-figure Rolex, but yet we bought, whatever, a $65, Allegiant plane ticket to fly somewhere. So, you see that frugality that exists out there, but then at the same time, you see people that have upgraded, for the experience of like, let me take first class. And honestly, until probably this year, which I've never purchased a first class ticket, but I did get upgraded a couple times on American Airlines. Shout out to American. And I see why. I see why people like to fly first class. I mean, give you the meal, give you the hot towel, they look comfortable, you on and off the plane quickly, and so I see where people, where the draw is on that. And we've had a lot of people, more than I would ever thought, throw out paying and buying first class seats. I get it when you fly long distance, but at the same time, I always had the mindset of like, you're flying on a plane no matter what. Like, how enjoyable could it really be when you're kind of strapped to a seat for several hours, going overseas? But that upgraded hotels, upgraded experiences on vacations, those are, I don't know, it's overwhelmingly like the 90+% I think that millionaires bring up, that's one of the kind of places that they've upgraded their lifestyle the most as their wealth has grown and being willing to upgrade. We had somebody kind of throw out concerts, going to concerts and getting like premium seating in concerts. So it just goes back into kind of that bucket of experiences. That's where most people are going to invest and spend more, and those memories last forever. So, and I think that, we're no different in that regard. And a lot of our millionaires seem to agree that that's the way to do it. I think that we have seen more that have come on our show get more intentional about that, which has been interesting. And being able, those are some things that honestly you can do, earlier in your life. Like if you want to go have a premium experience with your favorite band, for example, or even at your favorite restaurant, the cost to do that is not astronomical, that, prices you out, where maybe going and buying expensive jewelry or luxury, handbags or stuff that I didn't even know existed, honestly, till 10 years ago or 5 years ago even, or whatever. People are able to do that earlier. And so celebrate those miles. And I think we had one of our guests, well, actually it was Noah, he buys granted, he's got the substantial net worth and income to do so, but for big milestones in his life now, granted, he didn't do this when he was worth 10 million. He worth was even 20, but he's buying, watches to kind of commemorate those moments. And it's kind of funny because I kind of bonded with him over that a little bit, in the sense that I've kind of done the same. Now, not the same level of watch that he's been buying, but I've done that with a few rings for my kids and watches and stuff. And so I think you see some of these experiences and these attachments to memories that's what most millionaires are upgrading as their wealth grows.
I'd certainly agree that definitely those experiences have been probably the most important piece that most of our millionaires are wanting to spend their money after they feel like they've made it, or ways that they're upgrading their lifestyle aside from their primary home. And also sometimes investing in personal health a little bit more, and being more intentional about how they live their life moving forward, so that they can live a longer, healthier life along with that.
And with that, it's gonna be a great 2025. Got a lot of great interviews in the pipeline. If you're interested in being on the show, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. We're always looking for new, great, interesting guests, those that want to share their stories and are willing to. Varying levels of net worth as well. And got a lot of things coming in the pipeline. We'll announce later. Obviously, we had our first meetup this last year, which was a big highlight. And probably plan to do something similar in 2025, probably late fall again. And I mentioned the book that we should be able to hopefully publish. I know I've mentioned it a couple of times previously, but that was a long project. So I'm very excited where it's come and where it's gotten to. But that was a long project. So going to hopefully be releasing that here quickly. At least it's finally written and everything's kind of been done at this point. Before, it was kind of, we're halfway and we didn't realize it was going to take so much time after. So excited for that. And then we're going to have to publish the Millionaires report here soon, just kind of give a recap on all this data. And it's kind of interesting now that we've got several years of this under our belt now. So with that, I appreciate all of our listeners and all of our guests that have come on the show. Without you, we really wouldn't have any podcast. And tell your friends. We continue to grow. It makes it a good, fun journey to do it together. So appreciate you, and looking forward to 2025. signing off.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Jace Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website, millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.